All right, so let's talk about the Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford fight. So the fight's finally happened, man. Like, anyone who's been on boxing YouTube for at least the past 5 years, there's been nonstop talks about this fight. Errol the Truth Spence Jr. versus Terence Bud Crawford has been a fight that everyone has been clamoring for a long time now. And honestly, the YouTube community is pretty much split when it comes to these two fighters. You have guys on Errol Spence's side who basically said that Errol was the one who was really pushing for the fight and that Terence Crawford was over-evaluating himself. And then you have guys on the Terence Crawford side who were saying things like Errol was ducking the fight. They need to offer Crawford more money, things of that nature. But lo and behold, after the big fight against Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia, and people saw that, you know, you still could sell 1 million pay-per-views even despite all of the piracy that was going on, which is something that Fanon had said on his channel. It really did kind of take a little bit of the pressure off of Crawford, because he was saying that, you know, there was no way that this fight was going to sell because of the piracy issues, and that if he didn't get all of his money up front, or at least a big amount of his money up front, that there was no way that he was going to do the fight. But for whatever the issues that happened, it all got worked out, and now we finally get to see these two men in the ring, and we finally get to see Errol versus Terence and see who actually is the best fighter at 147. So I'm just going to talk about who I think is going to win, my prediction for the fight, and just, you know, my overall thoughts in regards to the fight. So when it comes to Errol Spence Jr., as you see, I got some of his highlights there in the background on my big old box TV from the 80s right here, you know what I'm saying? You know what that's called? That's called ghetto green screen. You know, what you know about that, you know what I'm saying? But Errol is a very, 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 very technically sound fighter. He has very good defense where he has a high guard. He oftentimes will parry punches as they're coming. He oftentimes will use his lead jab hand to manipulate his opponent's guard, who oftentimes uses his forearm to push an opponent into a favorable position for him to get off his shots. But his best attribute is the fact that he has incredible focus, he has incredible stamina, and he has incredible body punching. Now, all of these three things, combined with the fact that he has basically magnetic footwork where he can essentially stay directly in front of his opponent. Like, any step that his opponent takes, he also takes a step forward. Any step that his opponent pivots to, he also pivots at the same time. You saw when he fought Mikey Garcia, how Mikey Garcia was like, you know, he was always on me, always on me. And Mikey Garcia has some good feet, but he was able to constantly stay on Mikey Garcia. He was able to constantly stay with Sean Porter. He was able to constantly stay with Danny Garcia, and he was able to deliver his hard, thudding body punches until he pretty much started to break those guys down, and he was able to win by decision on all those fights. Now, Terence Crawford, he's a little bit different. Terence Crawford is a southpaw / orthodox fighter, so he could do both. And Terence Crawford has what I like to call a sniping style of boxing, meaning that he's similar to someone like Lomachenko, where oftentimes in the beginning of the fight, he might take a couple of rounds off and kind of lull his opponent to sleep as he is essentially downloading the data on his opponents. But unlike Lomachenko, who once he gets that data, he just starts taking a favorable angle and then like just going at his opponents and knocking them out, or just putting a lot of damage on him. Terence Crawford does something similar, but he does it in kind of a more sophisticated way than Lomachenko does. Instead of doing it just simply with footwork and angles, what Terence Crawford will do is he'll typically start off in an orthodox stance. He will gather up a lot of information from his opponents, and he'll gather up a lot of their tendencies, and then right when he has them figured out, he'll switch to the southpaw stance. And then from the southpaw stance, since he basically has their timing figured out, their tendencies figured out, their spacing figured out, he'll start sniping them with hard shots. And when he starts sniping them with these hard shots, basically it's shown that every time he ends up stopping the fight at 147 when he snipes them with these hard shots, because he already has everything about them figured out. He switches the stance. He gives them a totally different angle. They're not accustomed to his stance, but he already has the data. It's like they know his they don't know his distance, his timing or anything, but he has all that figured out, and then he just snipe, starts hitting them like effortlessly through their guard, starts hitting them effortlessly to the body, to the head, and he pretty much just mollywops them until the ref either stops the fight or his opponent is unable to fight. So with Terence Crawford, it's more like a period of gathering information followed by a relentless onslaught, and with Errol Spence, it's more like a relentless onslaught that breaks you down over time. Like Errol Spence is like a he's like a wave or water that's slowly eroding at a stone, and then, you know, Terence Crawford, he's just like dynamite. He just blows it up all at once. So you have two contrasting styles there that really make for a great fight. Now, when you look at the contrast of those styles, right, you could say that both of those things could favor either guy. That's why this is a 50-50 fight. On one hand, once Terence Crawford does figure out Errol Spence's spacing and his tendencies, and he sees the gaps in his defense, because Errol, like you see behind me with Sean Porter, Errol can get hit. Errol can get hit just like he can, you know, hit other people. Then he may be able to catch Errol Spence with something big, like Ugas was able to catch him, and then kind of buzz him a little bit, and then turn the tide of the fight. And even if he's not able to knock Errol Spence out or knock him down with those punches, it may be enough to where he can start tagging Errol and racking up rounds, and Errol won't be able to respond in enough time to win the fight or to gain enough rounds to beat Terence Crawford. Now, on the other hand, since Errol has this relentless pressure, all of those rounds that Crawford pretty much uses in order for him to attack Errol or to gain data on Errol is going to make him pay for every single second that Terence is using and Terence is taking in order for him to gain that data. So while Terence is, you know, looking to get Errol's tendencies down, while Terence is trying to focus and take his time to figure Errol out, Errol's going to be constantly pressing him. Errol's going to be constantly hitting him to the body. Errol's going to be constantly hitting him to the ribs. Errol's going to be constantly hitting him on the hips, and it's just going to be just an all-around just relentless onslaught from Errol Spence as he presses Terence Crawford and as Terence Crawford takes the time to try to figure Errol out. So both men seem to have, you know, a way to win this fight. And that's why I really like this fight. That's why every time I think about this fight, it just puts a smile on my face, because I really did look forward to the Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis fight. But the only thing about that fight was there was clearly one guy from the very jump that was just better, or that was just had the more experience, or that was just like at a higher talent level, and that was Gervonta Davis. Like anyone who really watches boxing a lot, except for Showbiz, because Showbiz put $4,000 on this man put $4,000 on Ryan Garcia, but I think that's just because he has that deal with that betting website, so he tries to make interest for that. And they're like, if I put $4,000 on Ryan Garcia, and he probably got paid that $4,000 from them to do that. I don't know, that's all speculation. I just don't think that he just seems like a very intelligent guy, and I just honestly don't think that he believed in Ryan Garcia enough to put that $4,000 down on there. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just going off on a tangent. But the thing that I thought was crazy about this fight is that, you know, both guys actually have a legitimate chance of winning. If Terence Crawford is able to survive the onslaught and to endure all the punches to the body, all the punches to the hips, all the punches to the ribs that Errol Spence is gonna inevitably put on him, because Errol Spence absolutely loves to go to the body, and he's able to figure Errol out, and then he switches to the southpaw stance, and then he's able to start sniping Errol, and Errol loses focus like he did with the Udenis Ugas fights, and then you know, Terence Crawford being one of the best finishers, he may have the opportunity to finish Errol at that point. Or if he's unable to do that, and Errol Spence is able to stick to him, and Errol Spence is able to continually go to his body, go to his head, and break him down over time, Errol Spence being the bigger man, he may actually have the opportunity to, stop Terence Crawford, or he may actually have the opportunity to win on points. So either man could possibly win on points, or either man could possibly win by a stoppage as well. So it's just a very interesting, fight to look at overall. Now, as far as what I think will happen is I'm leaning a little bit towards Errol Spence. So, and here's why. I'm just going to break it down. So, for one reason, like I said, Errol Spence is a quick starter. He typically starts out fighting at a very high intensity level, and he's able to maintain that high intensity level throughout the fight. So even though I think that Terence Crawford is going to want to start off slow and figure things out, he's not going to have that opportunity with Errol, because like I said earlier, every second that he uses to figure Errol out is going to cost him, because Errol is going to constantly be throwing punches. Now, another reason why I think that this fight favors Errol a little bit is because of Terence Crawford's temperament. Now, Terence Crawford is an incredible boxer. He's a great boxer. He has so much skill. He's such an intelligent boxer, but oftentimes because of his temperament, he's sometimes, in a similar way that Errol does as well when he fought Sean Porter, is that he will want to get into a dogfight when he doesn't necessarily have to. So when you consider just all of the smack that's been going back and forth on Twitter and on YouTube, and all of the history that him and Errol has, I believe that Terence Crawford is going to want to just take it right to Errol. And if he does decide that he's going to take it right to Errol and he's not going to fight a smarter fight, this fight could really go in Errol's favor, because he'll be fighting right into Errol Spence Jr.'s strengths, while going away from his strengths, which is counterpunching. And you saw that when he fought Velasquez, he made that fight much harder than it should be, because he decided that he wanted to go at Igas, and he wanted to just fight and Terence Crawford just wanted to just fight in a style that suited Igas by just making it a dogfight, even though he really did not have to. Now, of course, Terence Crawford ended up winning that fight because simply Terence Crawford is just a much better fighter than Igas Velasquez. They're just on two different levels. That's not saying that Igas is a bad fighter. Terence Crawford is just on another level. But I do not think for a second that that's a good idea that's a good idea of something that he should do when fighting Errol Spence Jr. Also, another reason why I think that Errol has a chance to win this fight, or I lean a little bit towards Errol, is the fact that Errol Spence is a natural southpaw. Now, with Terence Crawford, like I said, his biggest advantage throughout his campaign at welterweight was the fact that he could switch stances, go into the southpaw stance, completely change up the angles, and also and start sniping his opponent, because he already has their data. And then when he switches up the angle, he gives them a totally different look. The biggest and I think the greatest example of that was the Sean Porter fight. Sean Porter was coming right at Terence Crawford. Sean Porter was pushing on Terence Crawford. Sean Porter was getting some good shots into the body. Sean Porter looked like he could possibly be winning that fight during like the halfway mark, or during the point where he was being aggressive in the beginning of the fight. But as soon, and I do mean as soon, as Terence Crawford was able to change the angles on him by switching to the southpaw stance, he started sniping Sean Porter. Sean Porter was getting hit cleanly. I'm talking, his jaw was slinging out everywhere, or spit going everywhere. Sean Porter got knocked down, and then Kenny Porter, his father, decided to go ahead and stop the fight, because he really didn't see his son being able to adapt to Terence Crawford's fighting style quick enough for him to catch up during the fight. And he believed that his son was going to take more damage, and he believed that his son was going to continue to be knocked out. Now, some people said that that wasn't the real Sean Porter, quote unquote. That was podcast Porter, and he was no longer taking the sport seriously. But I mean, I can see that, but I actually do give Terence Crawford a lot of credit for the way that he ended that fight, because I had never seen Sean Porter handled so handedly. I mean, he took some big shots from Spence, and he went down in I believe it was the 11th round, and he took a big shot from Broner before and he went down, but I had never seen someone hit him so cleanly, so easily, and have him go down so easily. So it was just kind of just the testament to how good Terence Crawford is. So I don't take anything away from him from that. But I think that the difference between a Shawn Porter and the Errol Spence is that Errol Spence is a natural southpaw, orthodox to southpaw. When fighting Shawn Porter, that does give him a great advantage. But when fighting someone who is a natural southpaw with a great jab, with great focus on defense, and with great body punching, with the great engine, and with seems to be a lot of punch resistance, it may be a little bit harder for him to land those shots. So if he does switches to the southpaw and he starts to snipe Errol and it doesn't work, like let's say Errol's able to parry the shots, or Errol just shakes it off, he figures it out really quickly and he goes back again on his body punching, his moving forward, and his relentless onslaught to the hips, to the ribs, to the head, with his hooks where he gets a lot of leverage. I think that Errol could go ahead and finish that fight on a decision or stop Terence Crawford at some point. Now, another thing which people said, no, let's go back to Terence Crawford and how he could possibly win this fight. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think that Errol won't be so confused by Terence Crawford throwing those snipes, and I think that Errol will actually be able to continue his onslaught and continue to rack up points on Terence Crawford and eventually, win by a decision against Terence Crawford, or possibly stop Terence Crawford in the later rounds. That's what I believe to be the case, and that's what I think will happen. But there is a world where Terence Crawford, who is probably the best counterpuncher at 147, finds all the gaps in Errol Spence's guard, and he's able to capitalize on those. Like Terence Crawford, he's probably the greatest fighter at 147 to be able to punch through the guard. Terence Crawford is probably the greatest fighter at 147 to be able to counterpunch. Terence Crawford is probably the greatest fighter at 147 to be able to hit his opponent cleanly, and when he lands those clean shots, they're incredibly effective. So there is a scenario or a world where Terence Crawford does switch to that southpaw stance, or even before he switches to the southpaw stance, he's in the orthodox stance and he's able to tag Errol. I just think that Errol's biggest strength, or one of his biggest strengths, is just his ability to stay focused so that he doesn't get overwhelmed. Because a lot of times when you fight a guy like Terence Crawford, who's so crafty and who can fight you in so different ways, a lot of fighters get overwhelmed and they start to really not being able to defend themselves against his punches. But I feel like Errol, he's constantly staying focused. It's just focused. Like someone tries to punch him, he moves his arm up just and a couple centimeters up just to be able to block the punch. Someone tries to go low, he'll step back, or take a quarter step back, push them with their forearms and stop their body attack, or he'll just relentlessly keep coming at them. So I do think that Errol will be a little bit more in depth to being able to defend against Terence Crawford in that way, but I don't 100% know for sure. That's why this is a 50-50 fight. So yeah, and also I think there's another thing that I've heard different boxing people talking about and different boxing analysts talk about, is just Terence Crawford has a background in wrestling, and Terence Crawford is very physically strong. Now, since Terence Crawford moved up from 135, moved up from 140, and then moved up to 147, people have the preconceived notion that Errol, who's always been a 147 pounder, is the bigger, stronger man. But even though Shawn Porter was a smaller guy, Shawn Porter was one of the most physically strong welterweights that we know of, and Shawn Porter pretty much got moved easily by Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford, I remember there was one point where Terence Crawford had wrapped up Shawn Porter, walked him all the way back to the ropes, was like laughing at him and stuff, and he was very easily able to move Shawn Porter. And then also when you saw him fighting against Errol Spence directly in the pocket, it didn't seem as if Errol was able to move Shawn Porter as much during the beginning of the fight, or as easy as Terence Crawford did. But to be fair, Errol wasn't really wrapping Shawn Porter up. He was just trying to throw with him. But just Terence Crawford's ability to wrap up Shawn Porter, Terence Crawford's ability to easily move Shawn Porter, that is a testament to his physical strength. And even though Errol's this big, strong guy, and I'm leaning on Terence Crawford not being able to wrap Errol up and be able to, you know, stop the action and get separated easily by the referee, just because, you know, no fighter's really been able to do that so far. Maybe Terence Crawford is the guy to do, who'll be able to do that. Maybe Terence Crawford will be able to move to wrap Errol up. Maybe Terence Crawford will be able to get the referee to step in. Maybe Terence Crawford will be able to, you know, throw some shots while he's wrapping Errol, or maybe as soon as he lets go, he can just throw a quick sharp shot in there and maybe hurt Errol. But I don't necessarily see that happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was, because like I said, Terence Crawford is very deceptively strong. He's very physically strong, similar to how, you know, people were looking at Lomachenko like, oh, Lomachenko's a smaller man against Devin Haney. Devin Haney's the bigger guy. But then when they were in the clinch, you know, it was actually Lomachenko, since he was more naturally comfortable at that weight, was actually able to easily move Devin Haney. So it could be like that. I don't think that it will, but you know, there's always that option too. So just with everything that I just broke down there, and how I see the fight, I could see both guys winning. I'm leaning slightly towards Errol Spence. I see it as kind of like a 55-45 chance that Errol wins versus Crawford. But I wouldn't be surprised if the fight goes either way, because both of these men are incredible, great fighters at the top of their game, and I just like absolutely cannot wait to see the fight on the 29th of July, man. I'm just looking forward to it so much. But you know, that's all I gotta say about that, man. Let me know in the comments if you think that Errol's gonna win. Let me know in the comments if you think that Terence is gonna win. Let me know in the comments if you think that, you know, of how they're gonna win, if it's gonna be a knockout, if it's gonna go to the decision. I'm leaning towards, let's see, my heart of hearts, I'm seeing a stoppage. Actually, no, I don't think he's gonna stop Terence Crawford. I see a split decision Errol Spence shooting. That's what I'm seeing. But I wouldn't be surprised if Errol's able to put a hurting on him and possibly stop Terence Crawford like he stopped Ugas. But I don't think that that'll necessarily be the case. And also I wouldn't be surprised if you know, he gets some clean shots on Errol, he's able to stop Errol. Like, honestly, I don't know. I go back and forth with the fight, but like I said, right now I'm leaning 5% more Errol on the split decision, and that's all I gotta say about that. You give me your comments at the bottom of the video, and I'm out.